So thank you. A number of years ago, I was going to a seed-saving conference in Northern California with a bunch of friends. And on the way to the seed-saving conference, we were going to have lunch at a farm that was run by a man named Bob Kennard. And I didn't know who Bob Kennard was, and I didn't know what he did. So we ended up, showing up at his farmhouse, and we went around the outside. It was kind of dilapidated, needed some paint. It was a real working farm. And we went around the house and came on these beautiful picnic tables with a pergola over the top with these grapes hanging down. And we were kind of milling around. There were about 20, 25 of us. And Bob started bringing out food. And he brought out these huge salad bowls of golds and purples and greens. And he brought out homemade pastas and sun-dried tomatoes, homemade wines, homemade breads. It was one of the best meals of my life. And I snuck into the kitchen and I wanted to see what he was doing back there. And he had a stove the size of the space shuttle. And he had these stacks of plates in these big buckets, forks and knives and spoons. And just all these pots and pans hanging around the place. And he had hardly a stick of furniture in his living room, but he had this huge, polished, grand piano. And I thought, this is interesting. So we were eating this great food, and behind us there were all these shimmering fields, all these beautiful greens and vegetables and things growing in the sunlight. And it was just one of these beautiful pastoral days that you just can't forget. After lunch, Bob started giving this quadratic sermon on soil, air, water, and sun. And it was out there. I mean, Bob is, he's got hands like a mole. He had this shock of hair back here, and he had this sturdy barrel chest. And, here he is talking about how all these things are interlinked and working together, and how the soil is bringing up minerals through the roots, and how the plants are photosynthesizing, and they're breathing in air, and they're taking up water. And how this whole thing is swirling around. He said, we are water. And water permeates us, and we're 60% water, and these plants are probably 90% water. And we are water. Water is life. It glues things together. It transports nutrients, and it makes this whole thing work. And he said, we are air. Our lungs are sticky, wet. And if you spread them out, they're the size of a tennis court. And every one of us is going to take about 500 million breaths in our lives, and we're permeated with air. And these plants are producing oxygen that we are breathing in. And then he went into sunlight, the ultimate energy, and how this is feeding this whole system and making it work. And then he said, soil, that's just it. This is where everything is coming from. It's working up. It's coming up these roots and even to the animals and onto your plate. And so Bob was going out there. He was like sort of this poetic whack job, and we were loving it. So then he says, okay, let's walk around. I'll show you the farm. And we're looking around, and these plants are looking beautiful. I mean, they're just, they're just out there. So he says, well, this is what I do. I come out here and I walk the fields every day, and I kind of pull on the plants, and I sort of feel how strong the roots are, and I look at the color and how the sun shines and how they're, how they're feeling, and I kind of talk to them a little bit, and and we go, wow, these things look really great. And you know what? I didn't realize it when I went there, but Bob was the main grower for Alice Waters. I don't know if you've heard of her or not. She was, she had Chez Panisse in Berkeley, California. It was one of those restaurants that was, really renowned for local fresh food. I didn't realize that Bob was the main grower for that restaurant, right? So he's going on about how these plants are growing and, what he does. And he says, well, I take these minerals and I kind of scatter them around, and if the plants look like they need a little something, I give them a little minerals. And I go, all right, that sounds pretty good. Give them some minerals. All right, we'll write that one down. And we're going, well, Bob, don't you use like tons of compost and manure and just feed these things like crazy? I mean, these plants are looking really super good. And he kind of looks at us and, we couldn't quite tell if he was like the master kind of holding back the students just to build some hunger in the room, you know? And he said, well, that's an awful lot of work. I don't really do a lot of composting, and I don't use a lot of manures. It's, it's a lot of work to get it here. Oh, man, what's this guy all about? So he goes on, he says, weeds, I let the weeds go, and if they get a little higher than my plants, I chop them down, just lay them there. They'll, go back into the soil. Mostly the weeds want something else that my plants don't need. And then he said, really, I don't worry about pesticides, because if I just let the pest be there, after a while, one of the beneficials will come in and eat it and take care of it, so they all balance each other out, and I don't have to worry about that very much. So, these plants just look great. So we're kind of going, okay, all right, Bob, it's like good minerals, you pull in the plants, you look at them, you do all this stuff, and, compost is too much work, and, what? So, this goes on for about an hour. I just want the answer. Like, Bob, what do you feed these plants? I just want that one answer. Just give me one answer, Bob. What do you feed the plants, right? Because I'm just on that track. That's what I'm doing. And so, finally, we get around to the other edge of the farm, and, some other people have had some normal discussions where I'm just going, why is it even telling somebody feeds the plants? So we get to the other side. And finally, we come to these rows of buckets, just plastic, ordinary, everyday buckets. And they're kind of laid out in a calendar almost in just these rows. And he goes, okay, so here's what I do. And by the way, the soil was so leavened, it was so raised, you could almost shove your hand up to your elbow in it. It was beautiful soil. So Bob says, you see those woods over there? I go out in the woods, I brush away the leaves, I take, I just grab the beautiful topsoil, this humus underneath, and I fill up a bucket with it. I bring it back here, I take a handful and I drop it in each of the buckets. I put some water in each of the buckets, I throw some molasses in there, and then I let it sit around for a few days. And we're going, molasses. Okay, all right, so you get some humus, you put it in the bucket, you put it in the water, you get some molasses, okay, yeah, okay. So we go, then what do you do, Bob? I mean, come on, what do you do? Come on, what do you feed these plants, right? So he says, okay, well, I take these buckets, and I dump them in a big tank. He said, I dump them in this tank, and I throw a little bit of compost in there, I throw some herbs in there, and I throw some, some weeds that I picked, and I throw that in there, and I let that sit for a few days. We go, okay, all right. What do you feed the plants? So he says, well, okay, so I let that sit around for a few days, and then I take this and I pump it up into this. He had this huge, like 10,000 gallon redwood tank, like you'd see at a big vineyard or something. And he pumped everything up into that. And he said, I take that, and then I spray the fields. And we go, all right, look, you just started out with great soil, right? Because this is just like, this ain't happening. He goes, no, look at this field over here. And he had another field that he just rototilled. And it looked like rock and sand. He said, I just about broke my rototillers, breaking this thing up. And so we said, all right, so what's going on here, Bob? And he said, I'm using inoculants, I'm feeding this soil, and this soil is just raising. And I went, and it took me months to integrate this information, to sort of take it. And I realized that I had to unlearn in order to learn something. And I wanted one answer, and he wanted to give me the whole system of thinking, right? So I just want to give a little shout out to Bob tonight. And I want to thank all of you for just giving the consideration to this just, verdant, and peaceful world. Thank you.